This is part 3 of the teacher training course where we're going to loosely go over modules 9, 10, and 11. I'm not doing extensive information on these in this overview video. I don't think it's really necessary. I'm just going to hit a couple of highlights. So in a way, part 3 is sort of the summation to go over and include some other topics, including finalizing a final self-reflection and a success plan for each student, which may look different ways for different classes. So another John Olson gorgeous painting for your visual stimulation. I think that this last section, there's lots of opportunities to explore different things. And you might have some really great ideas about how to implement the exploration of communication, diversity, money management, suicide prevention, research. I would like to say this. It is essential that you have several different kinds of communication experiences, as this course counts as human relations credit for some of the AAS degrees. So in order to really fulfill that requirement, there's several different features of the communication topic that I'd like you to cover. I'll speak a little bit more about that in a moment. This may seem kind of daunting, but I think there's ways to maybe filter in some different possibilities here and start things a little sooner. You may decide, oh, I think I'm going to bring up the resume building a little bit sooner in the semester because it works a little bit better. So let's keep some of the ideas of timing for this stuff in flux, if that's not too irritating. So, communication. Communication covers so many different things. It covers writing, oral communication, written communication, plagiarism, anti-plagiarism, and other topics related to information literacy often. But I think it's really helpful to have some exercises. Maybe they're not graded exercises. Maybe they don't, there's something that you just do in class. Maybe they are a part of some assessment that you're doing. But one idea would be to give students an assignment to talk to one of their instructors. And I know students really hate this. I used to require students, all the EPY 150 students, to make appointments with me a couple of times during the semester. But when I had, 150 students, that became pretty crazy. So unfortunately, there are some things that students won't do unless you require them to do it. So an idea would be, as a nice object lesson, would be to talk to an instructor. The other exercise, which if you watch some of my teaching videos, you'll see an example of, is talking about doing a scenario where you examine a bad roommate who doesn't clean their dishes and how to communicate with them using I language. It's rather than you language. So I find that some of those exercises are really useful. Also doing pairing off in class to see just how well they do at talking about a topic and practicing reflective listening. So those are some of the ideas that I do in class, in addition to having them write about their reflections on communication patterns and styles. So you'll notice I'm jumping right into suicide prevention. I'm skipping over money management. I think that the book does a really great job of exploring money management, and it also gives a great exercise which I recommend everyone use, which is the monthly analysis of how you use your money. And they can start that earlier in the semester and then turn it in um, during, week 11 or 12 of the semester. Um, Suicide prevention is something that I want everyone to talk about in their classes. It is not covered in this version of Dave Ellis's Becoming a Master's Student, but it is essential that we talk about it. Every semester, I hear from a student who needed this information just as we were talking about it. So, first of all, one idea, just very briefly, that I like to talk about with students is myth busting. And one of the myths out there is that people who talk about suicide don't complete or attempt suicide, which is a myth. Another myth is that if you talk to someone who and you ask them if they're considering suicide and they aren't considering suicide, that question does not prompt them to want to commit suicide. So these are two myths out there that it's really helpful to talk about with students. What I'm doing right now is in no way sufficient to prepare one to talk about this topic. However, I find it helpful that at this time of the semester, hopefully you've built enough community. What I normally do is I tell students the class beforehand so they can be prepared that we're going to talk about suicide prevention in the next class. So they're fully aware. So if they choose to, that's what I've done. And the weird thing that happened last semester is I had everyone show up that day, and usually everyone didn't show up. So that was very interesting. I think it's important in our discussions to really get students to talk about, and us to talk about how important it is to take this conversation seriously and really listen to people. This is the 24-hour hotline, which I make students memorize. And in fact, on their last quiz, they have to, that's, a point if they can remember this 1-800 number. So that number is an important thing to give out. Now, the other thing that I highly recommend is if you haven't already done a suicide prevention training, that you consider doing one, and you would contact Professor Kim DeRoche here, who's a history professor here at the college. So definitely take advantage of the resources. So here's the idea. I know that students hate doing this, and I know that some of you probably will hate teaching this. But I have some suggestions. I have uploaded a handout that was taken from the OWL website at Purdue University. And my suggestion is that there's a certain process that you follow with students. And I think the first process to follow, the first thing to do is to get students to actually choose a topic that they're interested in. And again, this will be their final research paper, which won't be a huge research paper. It'll be a short research paper. But there'll be several steps to this. The first step will be choosing the topic, and it is solving an enduring problem. It could be a social problem. It could be a problem of poverty, societal injustice, but it could also legitimately be a problem that the student themselves is experiencing. For example, I think it's legitimate for students to choose the topic of their career goals or explorations because it's something that they're personally connected to. So I have a pretty broad stroke interpretation of the course objective, which says do research on an enduring problem. Now, I often, rather than have a library workshop, ask students to go talk to one of the reference librarians. They can also send an email through the website. And the reason why I do that is sometimes just going and talking to Larry or Ron will help you and kind of bypass a lot of noise. So it's a way of sort of forcing them into having a conversation with a real human. So my idea is that after they choose a topic and perhaps consult a reference librarian, they do a little research and they prepare an annotated bibliography of 5 references. And with as an annotated bibliography should have, it should have 2 to 4 sentences of summary and why the reference is useful. And that's important. So this is a very picayune kind of exercise, but it is, let's see how they do. Now, I have interspersed throughout the whole course different ideas for career planning and exploration. The e-portfolio, which is linked to BrainFuse, is actually kind of a direct spin-off of some of the ideas that Richard Bolles uses in his famous book, What Color is My Parachute? And this book is a great book. If you don't have it, I highly recommend getting it. It leads people through a process. So you might play around with some of those things and tell us what works. So the final assignments of part 3 are to create an e-portfolio. So I've created an instructional video that kind of talks you through how a student does this. And I think it's actually pretty easy. So the idea is that they create the e-portfolio and then they complete their final self-assessments, and they redo the discovery wheel, they redo the Lassie perhaps or something else, and they look over all of the other career explorations and other things they've done in class, and their final essay should be a kind of final self-assessment. What have they learned about themselves this semester? This is incredibly useful and powerful for the student because it allows them to reflect back and say to themselves, what are they taking with them that they can take forward? And that act of summarizing what they've learned about themselves is the sort of penultimate metacognitive achievement there. And then the final project is simply to write up some of the research that was connected to the APA annotated bibliography. So once they have completed the final self-assessment, the final project, resume, they can upload those things into their e-portfolio and then share the e-portfolio. So it'd be helpful if you if anybody has any questions or comments about issues with classroom climate, traditional community college students, those of you who have taught Jumpstart cohorts before, Some of you may be new to teaching Jumpstart cohorts, so any ideas that you can share with your fellow teachers would be awesome. I will put my comments and suggestions of my own in my own discussion post. So, this is a really short, I just wanted to go over a couple of things. So just make sure on your syllabus that you have the learning goals for EPY 150. You need to have a clear grading system. Last year, there was an adjunct who had no grading system, which was totally bad. So don't be that person. You need a grading system. The more explicit you are, the better. You need to have a disability statement. And you need to have the contact information for the Division Director of Liberal Arts. So, I have that here. Dr. Gary Schwartz is the Director of Liberal Arts Division, so make sure you have his contact information on your syllabus. You need the Katie Edmonds must be contacted if you are ill or need to cancel a class. If you need more help with Canvas training, I recommend contacting Justin. And please contact me if you would like more one-on-one conversations or any additional information. Whatever I can do to help you, please don't hesitate to ask.